Right, today is November 17th. It is 5 p.m. It is time for the City Council and Planning Commission joint work session. Leland Consulting is here, and I will hand it over to Carla.
Good evening. City Council and Planning Commission, our guest consultants, and members of the public. We did have introductions if we wanted to go around and have you folks introduce yourself to the public and our viewing audience. Just introduce yourself, and as Planning Commissioner or City Council, we'll round the table and we'll end with Travis and I. So I'm going to kick it off over there with Emily.
Hi, I am Emily. I'm the clerk of the Planning Commission, and I work in DCED as the permit coordinator.
Heather Robley, City Clerk. Nicole Hartman, City Council.
Karen Mahalik, Planning Commission.
Alex Fain, Planning Commission.
Kelly Berger, City Council.
Julianne Kuntz, Planning Commission.
Rachel Anderson, Deputy Mayor of Sequim.
Eileen Cummings, Planning Commission.
Dan Butler, City Council.
Planning Commission.
Harmony Rudder, City Council.
Hershuk, Leland Consulting Group.
Andrew Oliver, Leland Consulting.
Travis Simmons, Senior Planner.
Carla Boughton, the interim DCED director. And then we also have our mayor and a council member online. I don't know if you want to unmute and introduce yourselves. It's okay if Heather, if I can introduce them. Online we have our mayor. Okay, and then we also have Councilmember Vicky Lowe and Mayor Brandon. Denise, thank you. Okay, there's introductions. Oh, there's Vicky. All right, so I will kick us off and then turn it over to our consultant, but we are very excited tonight to present to you the SQUIM Housing and Economic Analysis Report findings. This is a important foundational component of the 2025 Comprehensive Plan update that we are underway. Leland Consulting Group has been retained by the city to provide some important technical technical and policy assistance for the comprehensive plan. One piece is the land capacity analysis, which informs the housing element as well as our land use map. And then this report that they will be presenting to you tonight was the second body of work that we retained for them to do on behalf of the city. The housing and economic analysis will supplement the comprehensive plan update and provides market-driven insights, current conditions. So it does provide like a snapshot in time of what our market conditions are. It identifies opportunities for the city to support housing and economic development and commercial development. It is intended to, again, provide some recommendations for regulatory and policy changes that could be considered or necessary in order to, ensure and pursue supporting housing development as well as economic development and economic vitality. So the report is dense. I hope you all had a chance to take a look at it, but Andrew and Jennifer will be able to distill it down for y'all. We will have checkpoints throughout the presentation where they'll stop and so that you can ask questions. They did break up the presentation to be parallel to the different sections of the report. And also there will be the recommendations that are in the report will be kind of that concluding the conclusion of that section so that if you have questions about the recommendations, that's the great time to do it. We also have little notepads there in case questions arise as you're listening to it so you can jot it down if that's helpful for you. But with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce Andrew and Jennifer and turn the presentation over to them. You met them all in July when they were here for your first joint meeting that you had together. on the in fact, in preparation for this report, as well as they met with a number of stakeholders in the city and housing, economic developers, housing developers, tourism representatives. So it was a really good swath of representation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leland Consulting Group. And thank you for traveling up to Sequim to meet with us in person.
Thank you, Carla. Hello, everyone. Nice to be with you again. Always a pleasure to come up here. It's a lot greener in the summer, but the gray is also very nice. We're going to present to you our report, which we started to discuss with you in the summer. And by means of introduction, Carla sort of summarized a bit of this as well, but just to sort of set the stage for this report, it's pretty broad. There's a lot of sections, as you saw. Each section kind of has its own intention and its own format, but overall, we're trying to help understand what are the opportunities for economic and housing growth over the next 20 years, this comprehensive plan framework timeline, and what regulatory and policy changes will be necessary to take advantage of the opportunities and support the community and maintain the qualities that are so important of livability in Sequim. So we looked at current conditions around employment and housing. We looked at some barriers to housing development and opportunities and strategies to meet city goals which have been articulated by both of your bodies, by staff, around meeting housing needs, looking at the future of the economy, and working on some regulatory reforms. So just to look at briefly at how we came to the conclusions in this report. As we mentioned, we were here in July for a kickoff with you all. We did a bunch of interviews during that trip, which we'll summarize in a few minutes here. We did a quantitative analysis of existing conditions, and then from those combined sort of engagement and analysis flow recommendations, and the recommendations then led into the implementation strategies at the end of the report, which you saw about how to sort of actualize the higher level recommendations. So as Carla mentioned, there are 6 sections to the presentation tonight, which mirror the report. So we'll have time to discuss and have questions for each of these topics: engagement, housing, economic development, real estate market trends, barriers to development, which actually is 2 sections in the report, but we've condensed them to 1 for the presentation, and then recommendations. So I'm going to start by talking a bit about our engagement process in the summer. We had a great meeting with you all, and then we had a couple days of great conversations with a lot of housing developers, landowners, some real estate professionals, some employers, people in the tourism industry, in economic development. And first, I'm just going to try to distill, hopefully, what you also felt were some key takeaways from our meeting with you, both of your bodies in the spring. We heard about a need for housing, especially workforce housing in Sequim, a lack of development in the employment zones, especially the HTLI zone, but also the economic opportunity areas, which haven't seen very much going on in the past decade or so. We heard a desire from both commission and council to build on what are really the great values of the city and the strengths within the region, the retail base, obviously tourism and high quality of life. And we talked a little bit about what sectors might be possible for future economic growth. Tourism, of course, but also we talked about technology, the rise in remote work since the pandemic, the potential maybe for a little bit of manufacturing or light industrial, but not sort of a large scale industrial, future. Some what we labeled considerations, just other big picture ideas that we took from that last conversation with you all. There was a lot of great conversation about what is Sequim's identity beyond a retirement destination. It's obviously has a reputation as a retirement destination, but that is only one part of what's going on in Sequim, and we really, it was a good conversation on that topic. So we're thinking about that. We heard a lot of questions and discussion about short-term rentals, which are addressed in here, and Jennifer will talk about later. We heard some great feedback on mobile home parks, what the role is in the city, advantages and disadvantages or potential changes around land use, and some concerns over healthcare capacity with the aging population. So we've broken the stakeholder feedback here into 4 topics. So we talked to a lot of housing developers and professionals, as I mentioned, and we heard, about some of the same things that we talked about with you all: a lack of diverse housing options, difficulties with hiring and workforce housing affordability, a need for multifamily homes. We heard from basically everyone, and some challenges with manufactured homes around maintenance, around costs. And we talked about the housing market as well. Similarly, people are thinking that, feeling a disparity between the wages in Sequim and how much it costs to live here. We heard entry-level homes are starting at, over $500,000 in a lot of cases, and that the market is skewed towards ownership, which translates to a lack of affordable, high-quality rental homes. We talked a lot about economic development. Big box retail, of course, as we know, is an important economic driver and has been for a long time in Sequim due to some, intentional actions of the council in the past, and that's been really beneficial for the city's economy. We talked a little bit about light manufacturing. Well, we heard some people feeling somewhat optimistic about that. We talked about the lab and asked, professionals and stakeholders what if there may be some potential for some ancillary technological or scientific employment, related to the presence of the lab. We heard, a lot that they sort of are doing their own thing, but there's also maybe some potential to explore that. Tourism, of course, a very important topic. We heard a lot about seasonality. We heard some people, talking about how a lot of people who end up moving to Sequim came here first as a tourist, and so it's sort of, the tourist industry sort of shows off the city to potential residents, and that's a benefit of the tourism sector, bringing in a variety of different people potentially to live here. Arts and culture in town and on the peninsula were brought up as an important part of quality of life. We also heard several people talking about hotels and the lack of hotel rooms at peak season, and also the lack, the challenges with hotels in the off season as well. So a lot about seasonality throughout all our conversations with stakeholders on the tourism front. We asked people about downtown. Everyone feels good about Sequim's downtown, that it's walkable, that they want to continue to promote that walkability, to continue to prioritize and nurture business in the downtown area. And we heard some good feedback on a couple new developments, such as the Tedesco building there that also has the seafood place and the brewery, as being an example of a transformation that created some nice more positive gathering space in downtown. More to think about on that front, but good feedback overall. Education and healthcare, other topics that we brought up and that were brought up by stakeholders. People felt good about the school bond. All on the healthcare front, we heard some concerns about the challenges facing the Olympic Medical Center, and also, as I mentioned earlier, just overall challenges with healthcare in a place with a lot of aging residents. The tribe is the biggest employer in town, also a big player in the healthcare sector in town, and we enjoyed our conversation with them. We learned a lot from that too. So moving sort of into the more technical side of things, we talked a lot to developers about regulations and fees and permits. We heard from several people some challenges with street connections. So we'll get into this later, but some issues that arose based on past regulatory changes that have prevented some development in areas of town. Design requirements are something else that we heard a lot of feedback about, especially for small projects that are facing challenges to meet design standards. Not a surprise, but developers expressed some concerns over the limited amounts of housing types in certain zones, especially since there's only one residential zone in Sequim. And we heard some, that people have had a lot of challenges with permitting over the years, which I think is not a mystery or not a surprise to anyone. But it's definitely something that we had a lot of good conversations about. Similarly, on the fee side, impact fees are pretty high. They've increased a lot over the past 20 years, which I think is, for the developers we talked to who have been here for a long time, was their main takeaway. And the fees that, yes, they're high, but more importantly, the rate of increase has been rapid. And there's some discrepancy in the way they're set up compared to other jurisdictions. So multifamily sometimes facing higher fees than single family, and we heard some concerns about the park impact fee specifically. Finally, on zoning, we heard a desire to increase the maximum height in downtown and or along Washington. Several people were talking about mixed use in the lifestyle district. So increased flexibility there and elsewhere that people were interested in exploring, including the EOAs, as you see in the next point. So the HTLI zone, although well-intentioned, developers have found it to be confusing and challenging to understand what they can and can't do there, which is one of the reasons why there probably hasn't been too much development there. And similarly, a desire for more housing to be allowed in other zones besides the residential and lifestyle zone, including possibly the HTLI, and certainly in the EOAs, Bell Creek and River Road. Yes, thank you. It's all in there somewhere. All right, so that's kind of what we heard. I don't know if there's any questions or feedback or further discussion on that. Happy to discuss, or else we can move on to the more data-driven section on housing.
Okay, I'll move on to housing. We talked a lot about age, retirement destination, and one of the things that we wanted to take a look at when it came to housing was, is there a discrepancy in home ownership by age group? The home ownership rate in SQUIM is about 60% of households are homeowners, 40% are renters. And so when we took a look at it, we saw that, the age groups up through about 54 years old have lower home ownership rates than the overall average in the city. And that older households typically have higher home ownership rates. There's not a lot of policy recommendations for that, but it does suggest that some of what we heard about housing challenges for younger families bears out in the data. So we also wanted to look at in-migration and out-migration, look at who's moving to, in this case, Clallam County, and who's moving out of Clallam County. So this map is based on IRS data from 2021 to 2022. And so what we found was that, a lot of Western Washington counties, some areas of California, the Portland metro area, a lot of people are moving to Clallam County. And in a lot of cases, these households have, on average, a pretty high household income. So the folks moving from King County to Clallam County have an average household income of about $121,000. Higher income folks from California also. And we heard from some stakeholders, a lot of people with, higher incomes are moving to town, and that does seem to be the case. And then out migration, it shows that on the flip side, when you look at the incomes, they're a little bit lower, the people that are moving out of Clallam County. So if you look at King County again, you have on average, the people moving from Clallam County to King County make about $73,000 a year. So this is just kind of data that's affirming what we heard from stakeholders, which is higher income folks moving to town and lower income folks moving out of town. For information's sake, the SQUIM needs 1,850 new housing units by 2045 to meet the state housing targets, which would be an annual growth rate of about 1.53%. This is showing permitting activity since 2003. And between 2003 and 2024, 1,882 new homes were permitted in SQUIM. So that's more than what's expected by the state through 2045. But you can see on the graph that most, or not most of it, but a lot of the years with the most permitting were prior to the Great Recession. So over the past several years, there's been a much slower rate of permitting and construction in SQUIM. And one of the ways to meet those housing targets is going to be by helping to encourage more multifamily housing so that, you get a bunch of permits units all at once. This is looking just at what is currently the residential land uses in SQUIM. So the yellow is single family residential. That's most of the current housing land use. What's interesting here that we're going to kind of keep going back to is all of the black on this map is residential land that is currently vacant. A lot of cities do not have much vacant residential land. SQUIM is really unique in that there are these, larger parcels of land that are residential land use that are currently vacant. So really big opportunity to increase the housing supply. Looking at housing inventory, SQUIM actually has a higher share of multifamily units than Port Angeles or Port Townsend. I think, that's not necessarily the perception, but that's, the reality, which is interesting. And mobile homes make up about 12% of the housing in SQUIM. So that's an important part of the housing supply here. And as I said before, SQUIM has about a 60% home ownership rate compared to 73% countywide. We heard a lot of questions about vacant homes, seasonal homes, and short-term rentals. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that here and then pause in case anybody has questions, because I know this was a really important topic for folks. So SQUIM's residential vacancy rate overall, which includes ownership housing and rental housing, is about 4.8%. And overall, of all the homes in SQUIM, 1.4% are seasonal, recreational, or occasional use. So in this chart, that's the green. And so that has been, it's higher now than it was pre-2019. So that's a trend to keep in mind. But overall, it's a pretty small share of the overall housing. And this is based on census data. We also looked at a site called AirDNA that looks at Airbnbs and VRBOs, so that short-term rental market where, it might not be like a year-round second home kind of thing. And we looked in July because we know that that's peak season in SQUIM. And we focused on full home listings because we were trying to answer the question of what is being taken off of market. And so full home listings accounted for 2.7% of all single family homes within city limits, which is, again, not a huge share of the homes in city limits. We looked at some research on how short-term rentals impact the housing supply. There's a study by the University of Pennsylvania that finds for each 1% increase in short-term rentals, there's a 0.024% increase in rents and 0.037% increase in home prices. That's in the study that was for cities with a 56% home ownership rate, which is pretty close to SQUIM. Short-term rentals are also, they're important in SQUIM because, as we'll talk about more later, hospitality is a challenging industry where it's so seasonal. So they give the opportunity to kind of increase the hospitality rooms in SQUIM during those peak seasons, but they don't have to operate year round like a hotel would. And, tourism being an important industry in SQUIM, there's just that need to weigh the impact to the housing supply versus the benefits to the tourism industry. And from the research we did, we found that, because SQUIM has vacant land, because there are other issues that we identified as more significant barriers, we didn't find that short-term rentals are really having a big impact on housing prices in the Sequim market. So I'm going to stop there because I'm sure people have questions. Is there any? Okay, well, okay, then I'll keep going. Okay, so as far as our recommendations for short-term rentals, we do recommend just that the city kind of keep an eye on it. You know, if suddenly there are 3 times as many short-term rentals in a couple of years, you know, that's something the city is going to want to know and just be aware of. So that's our recommendation there. And then for affordable housing, offering incentives for below market rate affordable housing, identifying potential opportunities to partner with nonprofits if the city identifies some underutilized publicly owned land. For housing development, we're going to get into this a little bit more later, but utilize DCED's existing developer forum to strengthen relationships with local developers, partnering with local economic development agencies to educate local developers on middle and multifamily housing development, and finding opportunities to streamline and improve the application review process.
Any questions on housing?
Yeah.
When you were tracking the short-term rentals, those were full homes, but how did you factor in ADUs?
That's a good question. So the data that we used, it showed it showed single family homes, apartments, bed and breakfast. So that's like the train car, and then other. There were not very many apartments or other. Most of the ones in Sequim were B&Bs or single family homes. So we focused on the single family homes because that was like the most significant share. But I'm not sure if that included ADUs.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yes.
Hi. Yeah. Sorry, I'm getting an echo. On page 15 in the report, there's a chart that talks about household characteristics. Can you tell me if households with unrelated members were tracked somehow?
I
couldn't see it in the data, but maybe I'm not reading it right.
Sorry, you said that was
page 15.
15.
It's a data point I'm really interested in.
I think just kind of report. Okay. Oh yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so
it should be right there in between
yeah,
households with people under 18 and people over 65, I think, right?
Yes, it looks like we didn't call that data out specifically in the report. But it is data that we could get from the census. I'm not sure why we didn't.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I know when I've talked to younger people, they're like got 4 or 5 roommates in a 2-bedroom house because they can't. And I think that's important that we keep track of that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
In other communities, have municipalities set up things like a housing fund or a trust from some revenue to support, helping with the affordable housing issue? Are there some people that have role models for us?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of different tools that can be used to generate revenue for affordable housing. We're evaluating some of those through the adequate provisions checklist and some of the work that we're doing on the comp plan outside of this. But yeah, they're definitely, I know, the biggest example I think is King County has an affordable housing trust fund, but obviously SQUIM is a different context. So we just want to make sure that, our recommendations would align with what makes sense for SQUIM.
The county has an opportunity, a fund that they take a percentage of their revenue, and it's specifically for sharing with the county and different projects, including affordable housing. So I thought we could probably do that. And the other thing I want, all your recommendations are really good, and the hope is for us to get the language in our comp plan. But we need some really strong words like must or not just support. Can you have a list of them for us to put in our comp plan so something gets done? It's an ongoing problem. It's been going on for a long time, and SQUIM's been around and housing issues been around. So we need to do something a little different in this comp plan, I think.
Yeah, and I just wanted to note that the city does collect what's called an affordable housing sales tax credit. It is something that you had to enact in 2020, which the city has done, and they have been collecting the funds and, to be used at the time, the city council determines is appropriate. And there's about $165,000 in that account. So there is funds that the city is collecting for, and it's to be used for an affordable housing project or projects, depending on, what the project is that the city is wanting to support.
Is it like a grant thing, or what? Somebody wanted to apply for some money?
It's what and how those funds are to be determined or to be granted has not been determined yet. So a city council member might certainly feel free to speak into it. Rachel, I know you're shaking your head, but my understanding is that it was the city council's preference to collect the funds over some years to get an amount that actually can mean something. So did I say that correctly? Okay.
You said in 2020. I do not recall that. I came here in 2021. But that is good to know. I know that one of the other funding sources, council opted into letting the county collect it. I want to say it was 1590 funds. The unfortunate circumstance is that it does not collect as much as quickly as I think a lot of us would like. But there's also, how do you balance increasing costs for taxpayers also? So there.
Right, there's the affordable housing property tax. I think that's what you're speaking to. Then Clallam County does collect that.
Other questions on housing? And that's a great point about the language. I mean, it's always a challenge to find the right words, but I think we hope that maybe through the implementation section of this as well, there could be some more concrete, increasingly concrete actions to be taken. Okay, I'm going to switch over to economic development. We see Tedesco's here. All right. So we did a sort of similar analysis to look at what's going on in SQUIM's economy and what that might mean for future policy. This chart shows the employment total number of employees by sector in 2012, 2022, and then of course the change between them, and the share of employment in Clallam County. But what I'm focusing on here basically is the biggest sectors and the sectors with the largest amount of increases in jobs. So healthcare, as we see at the top in red, is the biggest sector. It's also seen among the highest increases in jobs over the past decade. However, as we know, there are a lot of changes taking place to funding programs, including Medicaid. So that could potentially have some negative impacts on future healthcare growth, but it still is an very important part of SQUIM's economy. And I think that also speaks to some of the concerns we heard from stakeholders about the future health of the medical center. But it's not just the OMC. There's also, smaller healthcare jobs in town as well. Another key sector, obviously, is tourism, represented here by retail, trade, and accommodation and food services. Again, over 1,000 people employed in retail, over 500 in accommodation and food services, and those have also grown a lot in the past 10 years. And looking at the change column, the construction industry has also grown a lot over the past decade in Sequim, which is, although it's not a huge employer, it speaks to maybe some level of housing development that's been going on in the city. We looked at wages. So bars in purple are healthcare and education jobs. Bars in green are tourism and service industry jobs. So you can see, in general, the healthcare and education jobs are paying considerably more than the tourism and service industry jobs. This is something that I think we intuitively know, but we wanted to have some data also to back up the conversations we had about this. And as you can see, a lot of the healthcare jobs are paying much more than the average wage in Clallam County, which is the line there. So this speaks to what we started to talk about earlier, a need for housing to support workers at a wide variety of wages, especially since there are so many tourism and retail jobs in the city. Now looking forward, this shows the state's forecasts by industry in the Olympic region, which is Clallam, Jefferson. Is it just Clallam and Jefferson? Yeah, counties. And there's a lot of numbers, but again, I tried to circle things that are maybe important to think about. So again, education and health service projected to increase 16% over the next decade. Leisure and hospitality the same in this part of the state. So the state, at least the state economists are, envisioning a future when, similar industries that are the key industries here now are expected to continue. And at the bottom, as we see, continued expected declines in manufacturing and natural resources. So again, speaking to what we probably know intuitively, but that's what the state's forecasting for the region. We looked at commuting data. This comes from the census as well, looking at where people live and where they work. So the orange are where people who work in Sequim live. The purple are where people who live in Sequim work. Okay. So as you see, most people who work here in orange live pretty close by, as you would expect. A lot of people who live here also work close by, especially in Port Angeles. It's a little hard to see, but maybe I'll try to use the laser. So there's a big, no, laser's not working. Oh well, there's a big purple, bubble in Port Angeles of people who live in Sequim and work in PA. Also down at the casino. But there's also a lot of smaller purple dots all around the region, and some of these probably represent remote work. I have been trying very hard, without actually speaking to anybody at the census, to figure out how much of this accounts for remote work. I mean, obviously, there's not people commuting to Issaquah every day. Maybe they commute from time to time. But this does indicate, and I think this data set, as the years since the pandemic are progressing, is getting more attuned to remote work. So it's capturing some of that dynamic that's going on. Seasonality. So again, we heard a lot about it. We wanted to look at some data. This is lodging tax revenue data we got from staff. So overnight visits, a peak in the summer, May to September. The past 5 years have been relatively similar. 2021, so closer to the pandemic, was a little lower, but overall you see the big peak in August and a lot of drop off in the winter as far as tourism goes. This is some data on the downtown. So this looks at how many weekly visits there are within just downtown Sequim. This is based on Placer data, which is anonymized cell phone location data. And so it just sort of tracks how many people who don't live here are visiting in these times. So again, we see a similar trend. The Lavender Festival each year being the peak. It's gone down a little bit in the past couple of years on that weekend, but overall in downtown, we see a similar trend as to the rest of the city. We wanted to look at, if political changes or the pandemic or whatever else are decreasing visits from Canada, which of course we've heard only in the news. And indeed, it seems, although it's only year to date, that there have been, decreased visits in the past year from Canada, and certainly visits from Canada have not rebounded to their pre-pandemic level. This is for the whole state of Washington. So 2025 is on track to have fewer crossings than 2024, and the ferry in Port Angeles crossing is down about 11% over the past year. But, a big rebound since the pandemic, of course. Okay. We did an industry cluster analysis. This is basically looking at what we saw earlier, the change in employment on the horizontal axis. So we see for each sector, which is represented by a bubble, those sectors that have had the greatest increase in jobs since after the pandemic, so that I didn't really try not to factor it in too much, are farther to the right, and then decreasing employment on the left. On the vertical axis is the location quotient, which is a measure of how specialized an industry is in the region. So on the top, so as you go up, these are industries that have more employment in Clallam County than the national average. And as you go down, less employment in Clallam County than the national average. So it gives us these four kind of boxes. We have, so that I've labeled leading. So these are industries that are both specialized and have seen growth. Emerging industries have seen a lot of growth, but it's still not maybe as prominent of an industry here. On the bottom left, these industries, are lagging. They have neither seen a lot of growth, nor are they particularly specialized. And then maturing, which is kind of an interesting term, but think about something that's really a regional specialty, but hasn't seen much growth or has actually seen decline. And there we see natural resources. So there's twice as many jobs as the national average in Clallam County in natural resources, but it's been declining over the past 5 years. So what does this tell us? Well, a lot of the same things we've seen. Hospitality is important. There's a lot of government jobs here, a lot of healthcare, a lot of public administration jobs, and that is partially because a lot of tribal jobs are classified as public administration, and the tribe has a big presence the S'Klallam tribe has a big presence here, as we know. Smaller growth industries, but things to think about. Information, so that's mostly tech and professional services, have grown a lot over the past few years. This could be a remote work type thing or, other local businesses. So it's not a sector, those aren't sectors that we have, a locational advantage, but there's a lot of potential there. And we looked, based on some feedback from this body and others, at manufacturing specifically. So what kind of manufacturing might make sense based on the regional specialization here? And top of the list, unsurprisingly, is wood. So it's a really highly specialized industry in this region. Beverages as well, potentially, are things that there's already a cluster of these businesses in the county. So this leads into some of these opportunity sectors. These are things that we heard from stakeholders or from staff and from both of your bodies that were some things that you wanted us to explore. So there's a section in the report, as you saw, with write-ups on all of these. And to briefly summarize a few wildly sort of divergent ideas, but interesting things to think about for the future of the Sequim economy. The marine industry here, okay, there's a cluster on the peninsula with Port Angeles and Port Townsend, but really, there's not a huge amount of potential given the lack of waterfront space. Wood products, as we see in the data, is showing up as something where there's a lot of locational advantage. Also, there's a skilled workforce. We found a ton of existing cabinet manufacturers near the city, not necessarily in town, but over in Carlsberg, and there's a lot of things going on, and a lot of it is wood project manufacturing. So that's something to think about when we're thinking about commercial zones and what kind of things we might want to encourage or help to facilitate in those zones. Food and beverage is kind of similar. There's a lot of breweries, winery, cidery things going on the peninsula, not so much in town. So again, it could be more of a land use type consideration, although there has been, and even just this morning, I saw another article on sort of current potential jitters in the beer sector in the Northwest. So that's just something about. Alternative energy, complementing the work being done at the lab, they have contracted with some other companies based in the Bay Area to do research on alternative energy. Again, there's a lack of industrial land, but from the research side, there could be potential for maybe synergy with local businesses in that regard. Although, interestingly, I looked at data on every type of renewable energy generation, and SQUIM was like low on every metric. Like there's not a lot of sun. There's some sun, but not a ton. There's not a lot of wind, which is nice, but not for generation. There's not a lot of tidal because it's not so close to the end of the peninsula. So maybe not actually generating the energy, but certainly on the research side. We heard some discussion about warehousing, Amazon. This was mostly in regards to the conversations going on about whether or not they were going to, or where Amazon was going to expand its warehouse, which is now happening in Port Angeles. So probably less potential here in the future. I've in the report, you'll find some articles. I found some interesting research on, I was trying to see, like, has someone done a great study about, how much these Amazon centers, fulfillment centers and warehouses are really bringing to the local economies. And the research is very mixed, but it seems that that a lot of cities around the country are really laying out the red carpet for Amazon warehouses, and the local benefits can be somewhat limited in a lot of cases. So it's interesting to consider it. It's not necessarily a negative thing, but it's not as positive, I think, as maybe the perception can be. Local entrepreneurship is something that we heard about and talked about with economic development professionals in the area. We talked in the report a little bit about craft and flex industrial space, somewhere where people could start small scale businesses, be they more craft oriented or, making small things of some sort. So this is another type of sort of land use thing to consider potentially for the commercial zone. There's some good examples of these types of spaces in the report. Finally, we heard some conversations about police and military training. There was some interest from local business people in whether or not this might be another land use to consider here. We did find there's been a bunch of new police training facilities. There was a huge lack of police training statewide. It was like bottom or near the bottom in the nation for police training capacity 5 or 6 years ago in Washington. But there's been 3 new facilities opened in the past 3 years, so including one in Arlington, which is not too far away. So there may not be a immediate demand for a police training facility in the near future. So where does this leave us? Well, tourism. One thing that we recommending is to think about seasonality. We saw a lot of data on seasonality. There's the potential for thinking about how to extend the tourism season. Maybe that includes some more holiday or winter specific things, identifying strategies for other things that can take place outside of peak season, such as corporate retreats, and continuing to work with the Visitor Bureau and Tourism Commission. Encouraging the development of a sufficient supply of housing affordable to workers in the tourism industry. So this speaks to zoning, again, for a wider variety of housing types, incentives funding for affordable housing, which we were just talking about, and making sure that they stay engaged with employers around housing needs. As far as employment sectors, targeting higher wage jobs in industries which SQUIM has an advantage. So this speaks to wood products, beverages, some of these sectors we've been talking about, and that could be good fits within the city, even in a limited industrial capacity. We're recommending, to stay in touch with the port, which owns all the land at the marina, to think if there's some potential for future marine employment uses down there, even if it's a small shipbuilding or something. Promoting SQUIM as a location for clean energy research and development with the proximity to the lab, which I think is kind of an unknown quantity for, at least in a lot of our conversations, we heard people saying the lab is a bit of a sleeper. People don't know about it. And maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, but it could be certainly a potential for more collaboration with the business sector. Supporting the housing, education, and healthcare needs of the lab workers, which, the lab provides a lot of high wage jobs for the city and is planning to bring in more high wage jobs in years to come. So it's important to stay abreast of what their needs are. Okay. So I started talking fast, I'm sorry. Any questions on the economic development section? All right, I'll pass it back to Jennifer.
Okay, I'm going to talk about real estate market trends. This is like the one kind of informational section. There's not really recommendations related to the real estate market trends. This just gives you an idea of what the real estate market is doing in SQUIM right now. So ownership housing, you all know, it's expensive. So the first chart shows the typical home price. That's from the Zillow Home Value Index. They look at homes in the 30th to 60th percentile. So this is like your, kind of middle home. And in SQUIM, as of 2025, the typical home price is nearly $582,000, which is pretty high. It's higher than the Clallam County typical home price, as well as the typical home price in Port Angeles. We looked as just kind of a point in time at what was on the market as of August 2025. So, if you were trying to buy a home then, we looked at the different types of home and what the prices were. And so at that time, single family residential homes were on average about $825,000, which is very high. It could just be because that was, there was some big house on the market when we looked, but we thought that point in time data would be useful. But you can see that townhomes, mobile and manufactured homes, and condos were all a lot less expensive than that single family residential. So just another way of looking at, the different housing options that may be needed in the city. For multifamily housing, most of the multifamily housing in SQUIM was built between 1980 and 2009. So, Port Townsend and Port Angeles has seen a little bit more housing, multifamily housing construction since then. And SQUIM hasn't, not that either city had a lot, but SQUIM hasn't had any new housing within the past decade or so. And the multifamily vacancy rate in SQUIM is extremely low. It's 0.9%. Usually what would be considered a balanced market would be like 5 to 10%. So 0.9 is very low. That indicates that there's a much higher demand for multifamily housing than multifamily housing available. In Port Angeles and Port Townsend, it's also under 5%. So there's a real need across the peninsula for that type of housing. We wanted to look at the just the general inventory of different types of commercial spaces. You can see that most of the retail on the peninsula is concentrated in Port Angeles and SQUIM. And when in the little insert showing SQUIM, a lot of that is in that regional commercial zone with the big box stores, as well as downtown. And industrial space near SQUIM is mostly in that Carlsborg area rather than within city limits. This is showing commercial space built since 2015. That big green dot is the Seven Cedars. The multifamily in the northern part of SQUIM is actually a manufactured home development. And right now there's no planned office or industrial development in SQUIM. And the new retail is concentrated in that regional commercial center. We're going to talk about seasonality again. I know we already did, but just this is looking at taxable retail sales per capita. SQUIM is way outperforming in terms of taxable retail sales per capita, which means that people are coming from other places to spend money in SQUIM, and that's great. But there is also that challenge of seasonality where, retail sales are much lower in Q1 than in Q3 throughout the year. We used Placer, which is the anonymized cell phone data tracker that Andrew mentioned earlier, to look at the trade area of the Costco in Sequim. So you can see it's pulling visitors from all over the Olympic Peninsula. And we just wanted to note there are no Costco locations west of Sequim, and the nearest one to this one is in Silverdale, 55 miles away. So that, Sequim is really drawing from geographically a very large trade area to that regional commercial center. As far as office space, there hasn't been any new office space built in Sequim since 2009. It's a really challenging time for office. Speculative office space, which is, new office space that's built without a tenant in mind, is really challenging to build. Lenders aren't very excited to lend on it. Developers, are worried about high office vacancy rates. So that's probably not something that's likely in Sequim in the near term, but there could be opportunities for, if a business wants to locate in Sequim and build their own office, that's potentially possible. And there could be opportunities to support remote workers, so things like shared office spaces. We talked a little bit about healthcare and how there are concerns about the fact that Sequim doesn't have a lot of healthcare providers given an aging population. So we wanted to look at other cities, both nearby cities and cities that are kind of known as retirement destinations in Washington, to see what the ratio is of healthcare and social assistance jobs to residents 65 or older. And so Port Angeles, where there's the hospital, has 1.39 healthcare social assistance jobs to every resident who's 65 or older. Sequim has 0.32. So, we know from talking to folks on the staff and to the stakeholders that there are a lot of Sequim residents traveling to Port Angeles, Bremerton, and Port Orchard, as well as other cities for care. So there is likely a need for more healthcare within Sequim. Industrial, again, most of this is a space in Carlsborg. Port Angeles and Port Townsend are the major industrial hubs on the peninsula because of their working ports, which Sequim doesn't have. There are also some of the transportation challenges, like the on-off ramp challenges in Sequim that can impact the viability of warehouses. Hospitality, we've talked a bit about already, and the seasonality. Most of the newer hotel rooms in the area have been built outside of city limits, such as the Seven Cedars. The most recent hotels built within the city are the Quality Inn and Suites and the Holiday Inn Express. Seasonality just makes new hotel rooms challenging because, you have your few months of the year where it's packed and you can charge, pretty high rates. But then the rest of the year, most of your rooms are empty and you still have to have staff, which can be a challenge.
Excuse me for 1 second.
Yes.
Vicky has a question.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to turn off my camera and see if it fixes the echo. Back on the screen before this, where you're talking about healthcare professionals per, maybe one more. How were the employees of Olympic Medical Center considered? Because some of them work both in Sequim and Port Angeles.
That's a good question.
Yeah. That's a good question. I think that
I think it's something worth investigating.
It would be worth investigating because this
How's
data
that?
set from the census, the LEHD data set, it can be challenging because it will be based on where the person is paid from. So we've seen, for example, school districts that are in a city paying, teachers that work in another city, so that can skew that. I think we need to look into that more. I mean, it may be that the ratio mitigates a little between Port Angeles and Sequim as a result, but we can keep looking at it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for flagging that.
Question, your data, does it come from the census on these statistics? Because Port Townsend seems pretty low with the new hospital over there.
Yes, so this comes from the census using a tool called LEHD on the map, but it's all census data, yeah. Okay, and then we just wanted to highlight some general points about the current real estate and development market. Right now, kind of nationwide, but especially in the Seattle area and Pacific Northwest more generally, the current development market is challenging because of high labor and material costs as well as interest rates. So the chart is showing, it's called the Mortenson Construction Cost Index, basically working off of a factor of 100 as a baseline. And so you can see in 2009, it was, in the Seattle area, the index was 96. Now it's 208. So construction costs have more than doubled since 2009. And you can see that huge jump during the pandemic. A lot of that had to do with supply chain issues. Now there's some, tariffs and things like that. So construction costs have gotten really high. In Washington, there are, most cities have affordability challenges, but there are some cities that their rents are a lot higher. And so where rents are a lot higher, some of the construction is still feasible, but it becomes really challenging in cities like Sequim where you don't have Seattle rents, but you have really similar costs of construction. And so, when you have that kind of situation, there's higher rents or higher home prices, or incentives that are needed to encourage new development. So, nobody really wants higher home prices or rents. So figuring out where the barriers that you can address, what are some incentives you can provide, those are all things that are important in a situation like this. And the real estate market is always changing, but that's just kind of where we are right now in 2025. And I'm going to, yeah.
Oh, do the construction costs include all permits and fees necessary to complete the construction?
This is just like the vertical construction of the, like the hard cost.
Okay, concrete and wood and
Yeah.
all that. Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about some of the barriers to development that we identified both in talking to stakeholders as well as in the data that we looked at. So one of them is processes and relationships. So there's been, as you know, some staff turnover at the city over the past several years. That's had an impact on the relationship between the city and developers, and I think that's getting a lot better. I know Carla and Travis are working really hard at making that better, so that's good. We heard some feedback from developers that the permitting process can be long. There was some talk about how developers were saying they would submit a permit and then something would be wrong and then they'd submit it again, and they felt that it was going to the bottom of the pile. Whether or not that's true, but it was the perception, which is really important. And we heard from developers that it was really important that for them for the city to have an attitude of getting to yes. And when we talked to city staff, they said, yeah, that's important to us too. So I think that attitude, both on the part of developers and the city, is going to be really important going forward, because everybody wants more housing. So that alignment is going to improve things on that front. There were also a lot of questions around zoning and processes. And so, taking steps to improve the clarity of the zoning code, but also some education for developers and ongoing relationship building is going to help with some of that. Impact fees, Andrew mentioned this in the stakeholder engagement section. For parks especially, we heard that impact fees are high. And so there is a new state law, SB 5258, that requires jurisdictions to calculate impact fees to reflect proportional impact, which means basically scaling by the size of a unit, which could be the number of bedrooms or the square footage or the number of trips generated. So this chart is showing what Snohomish park impact fees look like right now. They recently changed theirs. The yellow line is what the Sequim Parks impact fee is for multifamily housing. And so what Snohomish did was they did by square footage, and they have these, different levels ranging from, $3,300 for units that are up to 895 square foot. That's probably like a 1-bedroom, maybe a small 2-bedroom, all the way up to $11,500 for a 2,370 square foot or more building. So that's going to be a large house. And so, this is not to say that these are the numbers that Sequim should use, because in Snohomish, housing costs are a lot higher than in Sequim. But this is just to give you an idea of what that looks like, and also where Sequim's park fee is currently, which is, a little bit higher than what Snohomish would require for a unit that's around 1,400 square feet. Labor pool and expertise. There's not a lot of construction jobs in the Olympic Peninsula. It's a limited construction labor pool compared to other areas of Washington, which can drive up costs, but it can also just make it hard to find somebody to build a house. So we looked at other areas, the Seattle metro area, Kitsap County, Skagit County, and Thurston County. And the Olympic Peninsula has, far fewer establishments and jobs than those areas. Some of the good news is that CCEDC plans to offer some developer training so that local developers who are used to building single-family homes can learn more about middle housing and multifamily housing. And we think, Sequim has opportunities to plug into that and give some, Sequim-specific information to developers. But also there's probably a need to develop relationships with developers and construction companies outside of the Olympic Peninsula. Make the case for why Sequim is a great place to be, why people want to live here, and, why they should come and build. This was interesting. When we talked to developers, we heard about landlocked subdivisions. So these are subdivisions that had begun to build out with private roads, and there was a regulatory change regarding the connectivity between private roads and public roads. And as a result, there are these vacant parcels that pretty much can't be accessed, and the developers can't continue building these roads out. This seems like kind of the lowest hanging fruit. Like, if the city can figure out how to solve this quagmire, then the developers are ready to build these houses. And so that was something that stood out to us as like, yeah, that can happen. And we've gotten good feedback from the city on that. So yeah, that's exciting. I'm going to talk a little bit about zoning. We analyzed a lot of the city zones. I'm not going to go through every single recommendation that we had for those, though we have slides on them if we want to reference them. But as far as residential, so there's some new legislation, HB 1110 around middle housing and HB 1337 around ADUs. Sequim's not subject to 1110, but should consider allowing a wider variety of housing types, and potentially consider creating a moderate density residential zone, because right now the city only has one residential zone. And then just updating ADU regulations to align with HB 1337, which the city is already working on. And then these are just some highlights from the commercial zones that we looked at. So the lifestyle district, the challenges we identified was if the city wants to encourage mixed use housing in this area, the maximum height should be a little bit higher. In the code, there's also an emphasis on senior housing here, and we had heard that this should not just be senior housing, that it should be, housing for everybody. So, changing some of that language in the code, and then the open space requirements for multifamily housing, when combined with the high park impact fee, it was adding to the cost of projects. So maybe adding flexibility to the open space requirements. The high-tech light industrial zone, the biggest challenge that we found was that the use table it's overly prescriptive, and it also prohibits office uses. And so most of the things that the city wants to see there, whether that's research and development or high tech or manufacturing, there's going to be some, at least small, office component. So, that's a challenge. And then we also recommend allowing for a mix of office, light industrial, light assembly, clean energy, and research and development. And then establishing environmental performance standards, because we heard from a lot of folks, including you all, that, SQUIM has clean air, clean water. There's not an interest in like heavy industrial, something that's going to be polluting. So just making sure that the uses in that area don't have negative impacts on the city. And then for regional commercial, that area is doing great. But there are some changing trends in development where there's increasing interest in mixed use development in areas that have had that kind of traditional big box pattern where, maybe there's like underutilized parking lots, making them more walkable. So this is not urgent, but there could be a conversation around allowing for mixed use development in that zone to kind of attract, a wider variety of development types. Okay, so yeah, our recommendations here, working with local and regional partners on educational outreach for developers, increasing clarity in the zoning code to reduce uncertainty, creating opportunities for communication between developers and city staff, updating impact fees to comply with new state regulations, considering implementing a parks fee waiver for multifamily developments that meet a certain threshold for open space or developments located within walking distance of an existing park, and partnering with local economic development to address some of the labor shortages, and offering informational outreach that regards SQUIM's specific zoning code, and conducting outreach to developers in other parts of Washington. And then, as we said, addressing some of those street standards and connectivity challenges for those landlocked parcels. Any questions? Well, oh, sorry, there's also the street standards. But so we're done with our presentation. We have the recommendations kind of listed out in full back here. We're not going to go through them one by one, but if there are any that you all want to ask us questions about, if you have any feedback for us, we'd love to hear what you think.
Why are you smiling? At the beginning of the presentation, you said that SQUIM had a higher percentage of multifamily to its total stock. And yet we're also feeling like we don't have quite enough because our vacancy rates are low. Could the vacancy rates be low because SQUIM is just a superior place for multifamily renters to live and they would select us over Port Angeles or other areas? And could that be the driver for why our multifamily, I mean, it was super low. And as a former banker, I like to see that. I like to see there's no stress on the cash flows. So could you give us a little feedback on that?
Yeah, I mean, SQUIM is a great place to live. I think the challenge is that when the vacancy rate is that low, it can drive prices up. So, if there's a need for more affordability in the housing, I think more housing is probably needed. But yeah, I mean, who doesn't love living in Sequim? Yeah.
Throughout your presentation, you talked about a lot about improving relationships with a lot of different people. And I think that's important, but our staff works hard already. Do you think, and nowhere in it recommending, additional staff to take on this responsibility. Would that be a worthwhile consideration, having I don't know, community liaison or, public relations, something? I don't know. Because, all of these networking things take meeting time, talking time, telephone time, and these guys are busy.
Yes. So there are, places where the staff is already doing that work, which is good. And I think there are opportunities to continue that. In other communities that we work in, we've definitely recommended things like, a downtown ombudsman so that, people who are interested in opening businesses downtown have somebody to talk to, or, a dedicated economic development professional who can go and do like business recruitment. I don't think that that's necessarily out of the question in Sequim. It's just, a question of, city resources and priorities.
Councilor Lowe, do you have a question?
I do. I was still trying to formulate it in my head a little bit. Under the housing recommendations, I know that we do, you talked about some of the houses that are vacant and also some that need repair. And I'm wondering, rather than building new houses, new buildings, what can we do to help people get their house in better repair so they can stay in it longer, or encourage like people whose parents have passed away and they live in a different city and the house is just sitting vacant? Are there any recommendations along those lines?
Thanks. That's a good question. We didn't put anything specific about that, about repair, and there are plenty of cities that have grant programs that can fund repair of housing that's in bad shape where people can't afford to repair it, to prevent either living in substandard housing or the housing from being demolished. As I recall offhand, the share, the quality of housing in Sequim that we found, at least based on census data, is higher than other parts of the Olympic Peninsula. But I think that's certainly, it's more of a funding question too from the city side. But as we're talking about housing funding and things, it's important to consider preservation funding as well, and can be important for lower income homeowners to stay in their homes. So definitely a good thing to consider. I think it wasn't a data point that stood out particularly high in Sequim, the quality of housing, which is good, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So thanks for bringing that up, for sure.
I have a quick question. First of all, thank you so much for your presentation. Very insightful. And I was wondering if we would be able to get a copy of your slide deck. That would be awesome. Thank you. It's great to have all of that, all those data points and all the research and seeing what is actually happening out there in the housing market, in the housing mix, short-term rentals, what have you. Thank you.
Hey, Harmony. The presentation is online. It's on our comprehensive plan update page. You're welcome.
In the number of construction establishments and the number of jobs, I noticed that for Clallam County, the 357 establishments have 1,200 jobs. So that's about 3.5 or something per establishment. So are we having a lot of sole contractors or, young men sitting out to build a company having a really difficult time because of Washington regulations and adding staff and growing their business? And any idea of what the average construction worker hourly salary is? And if these are difficulties in the area? Thanks.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of the smaller construction establishments typically are like, one or two guys who maybe hire, temporary or part-time or seasonal labor. That's pretty common in the construction industry. Whereas, in some other areas where you'll see, like in Skagit County, there's, 563 establishments, but almost 4,400 jobs. That's going to be, kind of larger, more established company with like permanent construction labor. So, yeah, that's a challenge for sure in the Olympic Peninsula, is the lack of construction workers. Andrew is looking up the. Not sure if we had construction.
Yeah, we don't have the construction wage in that table of wages, but we can get back to you on it.
I have a question regarding that data point for construction jobs. Is that classified in any way, or is it anybody that would be like a plumbing contractor, electrical contractor, or is it just solely construction? Because I know construction contractors can encompass, just craftsmen that do trim, people that just do remodels compared to new construction.
Yeah, so it's like a high level industry, so it's going to incorporate all of that.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Not seeing any. I just wanted to make a few comments about how a lot of our barriers, I think I said this back in July too, but a lot of our barriers are legislative in nature, in that, there's things like the cost of housing will be more expensive when nonprofits try and build housing, but they have to hire at the prevailing wage, which is connected to King County, and, trying to figure out if there's a way to switch from, King County prevailing wages to more rural community. And then, there's things like energy regulations now that are driving up the cost of construction. There are things like, I'm just trying to remember some of the things we've talked about. I think Vicki mentioned funding for, updating older or lower quality housing. And that is something we've talked about on the Housing Solutions Committee, but with no active solution, granted. So there's all these things and barriers that we end up talking about, but then when it comes to finding solutions, it doesn't feel like there's anything tangible other than consistently pushing on an uphill battle. And so I just want to make sure everybody has that in mind, that some things that we want to address will not change overnight, and it will have to be over several years. Any last questions or comments? Yeah.
in the work location of Sequim residents, it showed that so many are commuting to Port Angeles, probably for work at OMC and other places, as well as Casino at Blinn. Were you able to meet any of those workers? And is the free Clallam County buses, are a lot of those commuting workers able to, or are they using those buses to make their life simpler? Thanks.
Great question. We didn't talk to any as part of this work. We are doing maybe some more economic work in the future, and there was other engagement done as part of the comp plan earlier this year that that was more public focused. But it's a great question. Do you have any thoughts on that, Carla or Travis?
I don't see that many people at the transit station in the morning when we're coming to work. So or when we're leaving, so I mean, we could just be missing them as we're coming to and from, but for the most part, it doesn't seem like a lot of folks are utilizing the bus routes to and from Port Angeles for work, but it'd be interesting to talk to transit specifically about.
I could.
They should have ridership data probably available.
We might see that data show up in our transportation master plan because it does need to have a transit component. And so that's still underway, under development with the city's transportation consultant, the Transpo Group. So it's possible it may, we can talk about maybe getting that specific data. There's going to be overall ridership data presented in that plan.
If I may make a comment, actually, there are quite a few people when I go for a walk at lunch. There are quite a few people at the transit station waiting for a bus, and in the summertime, people traveling.
I would just say too, my husband, so he's a work study at the college. Granted, we're just one family, right? One family of transit users, but I would say that because his boss is a little bit more lax and he can say, hey, if there's something happened in transit and I'm going to be late, he doesn't really suffer any consequences for that. But if I had a job in Port Angeles, I would drive my own vehicle just to ensure that I would get there on time. So I think I would really be interested in the data to hear about that. But I'm also curious to know, like, how many of those people actually don't have a vehicle? How many of them can't afford gas money or insurance or something of that nature? So there's just a lot of variables that I would want to know from that data too.
Since we're talking on this subject, I'd like to chime in. I find that and this is always a challenge with transit systems, is having the right bus going the right direction in the right place at the right time to make it usable for all the people to use the system. And just from my own perspective, when my job site was in downtown Port Angeles, it was a no-brainer. I was on the bus every single time. Save money. It was more time to do email and all sorts of things. And but then when my job site moved outside of downtown, and then I had to get into town, wait 15 minutes for a transfer, then that bus takes another 15, 20 minutes to noodle around in town. It just added this extra time that wasn't conducive. And it doubled the amount of time that I spent on transit every day. And at some point you have to make that cost analysis of your time and your, what are you going to be doing? So, there's so many variables. I'm really grateful that our system has been piloting this fare free process, and I really look forward to seeing some more of the data on that. But it's a very complex issue, and it comes down to every single rider. Thanks.
Can I say I've been noodling on the deputy mayor's point here about, sorry, to go back one step on legislative requirements and what that means for housing construction feasibility. And there's so many layers of things that that are at play. I think it's the what we were trying to focus on, or what I think is important to focus on, or what you can even focus on at the local level here, is sort of is looking at where SQUIM is in comparison with like its internal needs and the sort of smaller regional needs. And I think understanding that housing affordability is important to consider within the city and within the peninsula as a whole. And so just thinking about like the best thing to do for housing affordability and availability is to position the city in comparison with the people who might most need to be here to find a place to live, be they residents of SQUIM or potential residents of SQUIM, or maybe employees in Port Angeles or whatever, and how does it compare with that market, and what can be done to at least get on a base level to ensure that the housing can be built here. And I think on a statewide level, there's a lot of work being done, both requiring cities to allow certain things, and also as far as densification, but also, as you mentioned, as far as energy and other requirements that it costs money. And I think that there's going to have to, a lot of this is going to have to flow into bigger conversations on the statewide level about how the state is intending to finance that in years to come. But if SQUIM is well positioned now to provide for the affordability that's needed in the community, and especially compared with surrounding communities, so people that maybe don't have to commute as long distances and have the possibility to live closer where they work and things like that, I think that it can seem amorphous to have these recommendations like make things easier for developers or do outreach and stuff. But it really comes down to sort of being well positioned to serve the needs of the community as much as you can within these huger landscapes that you have less local control over. So I don't know. It's philosophically challenging. I agree. But I think there's a lot to be said for the work that you guys are doing to improve the lives of the people in the community. So anyway, that's my brief pontificating on that subject.
So just a quick comment that at work sessions, we don't typically allow public comment, but if you have any questions, you can always email them to Carla Boughton. She is our subject matter expert, and then she could always, get in touch with Leland if you have specific questions for them. If you are so inclined, you could also CC Planning Commission and City Council just to make us aware of what you're asking. We always really appreciate that, to know what the public wants to know.
Yeah, I had a question for you. Have you, in any of your consulting work in other communities, and I'm just kind of looking for some bullet points if you have them on a fairly high level, have you had experience with communities that have implemented programs such as Nesterly or home share platforms, that citizens have been able to utilize? And have you seen an impact on the available housing or the cost or affordability of housing, or is that something that hasn't come before you yet?
I don't think that's something we've come across.
Okay.
But I'll keep you updated if we do.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I would appreciate it. It's a platform that allows for, home sharing, and it's, it'd be interesting to know, what the feedback is and success or failure rate, so to speak, in communities.
We have talked about that at Housing Solutions Committee also. The last I heard, I can't remember which one it was, if it was like Silvernest or Nesterly, but one of them had been bought by somebody else and was getting a complete overhaul, and making sure that everything is protecting the homeowner and protecting the tenant. So I think they're really working on their policy. But there has been some just citizens drumming up interest for that. I know there was, I can't remember her name, but she has been doing like public talks about it, like at the library. Just making
I've got
sure
that one for you, Rachel.
Yeah.
It's Nancy Steffens.
Thank you. So just making sure people have the right information about it and aren't coming up with. Yeah. I think that's it.
All right,
Yeah.
thanks.
Any other questions or comments?
Hey, Rachel, it's Vicky. That's why I was interested in that data also on unrelated people sharing homes. I think people might be doing that without that program too as well.
One more thing I remembered about the legislation happening. One thing in the Housing Solutions Committee, we are hearing that landlords are less likely to rent because of all of the state regulations seeming to lean toward tenants and not, like they can live for months without the landlord being paid rent kind of thing. And so that is one of those things we can't necessarily control, but we can advocate for things like that in the legislative process. Thank you.
And I would put that a different way, is that the people who are current landlords might go away, other landlords might come in that think differently about housing and in a less capitalist way.
All righty.
This might be a statement of the obvious, but I think one of the point was made that we need to be planning for what the future SQUIM will look like and what we need, because you can see everything with our demographics and the average age, income, all these things. Well, maybe it looks that way because we don't have affordable housing. We don't have the younger people. We don't have the workforce. And so what do we want it to look like 10 years from now? Or what do we need it to look like 10 years from now?
I'd also be curious to know that there are so many entities on the Olympic Peninsula that do their best to fill in the gaps, and having a comprehensive report like this puts it all on paper for anybody to be able to read. And so I'm very thankful for that, just so other entities can have that data and try and help out too.
To that, I just want to note that the report is posted on the city's website, as well as tonight's PowerPoint from Leland Consulting. It's at the 2025 Comprehensive Plan Update page. So you don't even have to go to the SQUIM website. You can just Google City SQUIM Comprehensive Plan Update, and it'll bring you right there. It's at the very top of the page. So the full report, which has actually a lot more data than what was presented tonight. And so please feel free to go and review at your convenience. And then again, the PowerPoint that was presented tonight is also available online as well. And yes, and like I said at the beginning, and like what our guest said, this provides some very, it provides a great snapshot in time of our demographics, of our situation of housing and economics and jobs, and gives us a really good to-do list for Travis and I and the DCD department, as well as Public Works Department to address a number of their recommendations. So you'll be hearing about this report as we bring forward, the comprehensive plan as well, and mostly you'll see it in amendments to the municipal code. I just want to, go ahead, please.
Just going to ask if you would remind us where we are in the timeline of development of the comprehensive plan.
Yes. Well, we are rounding the corner for the policy document review by the Planning Commission. They actually are meeting tomorrow night on the housing chapter, and that was done a bit on purpose so that after tonight's meeting, we can move right into reviewing the housing goals and policies. And then we also have we have economic development chapter. Then we have the additional housing documents that are required by the state that Andrew talked a little bit about, but they're going to be called the housing needs assessment. the adequate provisions and our land capacity analysis will be in that document, as well as the racially disparate impact analysis. Those are all required by the state. That will be at the first meeting in the Planning Commission in December, and we'll close out the year with the Economic Development chapter at the second meeting in December with the Planning Commission. Where that is that concludes the policy document. So all the chapters have been reviewed and have been revised and edited and commented on by the Planning Commission. There is still more work to do, and that entails the capital facility plan, which is we have kicked that off with the Public Works Department. It is going to be done in-house with assistance by city consultants for our utility plans and our transportation plan. And then all of that will have a companion of zoning code amendments, zoning code amendments. So that's Title 18. There will be a number of amendments related to housing. So some of the housing requirements that we talked about tonight, as well as a number of the recommendations. In fact, probably most of them will be in that first batch of development regulation updates of what you heard tonight as part of this report. So we'll be looking at the use tables. In fact, I should note that we're already doing that. Travis is already underway. We started kind of in the middle of October to do that work. And so you'll be seeing that at the time that we'll do the full comprehensive plan release, which will be the first quarter of 2026, so probably around March or April, where we'll have a Planning Commission recommended comprehensive plan, and we'll have a set of development regulations. So there's still a bit of work to do. Quite a bit of work's been done, and 2026 will be our busy year. But we're on track for public hearings in June of 2026 before the City Council.
All right, any last questions or comments?
I just want to thank you all for all the input that you gave us, the great questions that you asked at the kickoff that informed our research. It's been great working with you all. Thank you.
No, I thought maybe Matt was wanting to say something.
I don't think it would be a regular meeting if you didn't say something.
Yeah, well, thank you. So amazing. I just always like to pause to think and reflect. I've been here 4 years. I've never had this kind of data. I think we've been praised and criticized for what we are or aren't, and everybody has a different idea and opinion, and now we know. Like now we have data, now we have graphs, now we have history, we have trends, we have something that we can use and move forward with, which is really what the city needs to be about and is about. We try to make data-driven decisions. I really can't thank Carla enough for finding and bringing Leland in, because this is wonderful to be at this place. So thank you for your hard work. I really want to thank the council and the commission for trusting in city leadership. We changed horses in the middle of the stream here and promised that you would have a quality product that you could act on and make decisions off of. And that was risky. And you trusted. And so I really thank you all for that, because we are getting what we were told we would have. And so that was a big deal. So anyway, I just want to thank everybody that's put all this forward to the community and to the decision makers, particularly the policy makers, because now I think we have the beginnings of some action items, and the future of our city now can be made around actual data. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah, and I just want to say thank you very much. It was a very well-written document that was easy to read and easy to comprehend, and it there were some things in there that really surprised me, like the data on the short-term rentals, and that that's been something that has really weighed on the commission for quite frankly years. Like, how do we move forward with this? And now we have the information that we can make a better decision about should there be policy written around that? And if there is, what are we looking at? So I really appreciate the work that you did.
Yes. I want to thank everybody. Thank you to the public for being here and anybody listening in online. Thank you, Leland Consulting. We really appreciate all of the data. I don't know how you put it all together so beautifully, but it looked great. I really appreciated your presentation. Thanks for Planning Commission for being here, Council for being here. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you.